it's Christy. So excited to be back with you on the Lawnfawn YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using the brand new Capybaras along with Swan Soirée and the kanga-rrific add-on. So I've stamped those images out on white cardstock with Lawnfawn jet black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm going to jump right in with my capybaras, and I'm going to be using some E30 shades for them. I've pulled out E30, E31, E33, E35, and E37. For this larger one, I'm going to start with my E37, laying in my shadows along the top of the body, the back of the legs, and the underside of the neck and throat. And then I'll start blending that out with the E35, making sure to go over the edge of that E37 and pull that darker color out into this lighter shade so that I get a nice smooth blend. Then I'll bring in the E33 and I'm going to continue coloring, doing that same trick with just going over the previous shade to pull that color into the next one. Working my way toward the center of the body, but I did save a little bit of room for a nice highlight with the E31, and I'm going to color in little circular motions to really break up the edge of the previous shade and fill him in. So I only used the darkest 4 shades for the adult because I wanted him to be a little bit darker than the babies. So for the babies, I'm going to start with the next shade down, which is the E35, and that is going to be my shadows. I like to color my critters or people with the shadows down their back and the highlight on their face, which just makes the features stay nice and bright and clearly visible. So once I have that E35 laid in, I'll start blending out with the next shade, which is the E33. And then I'm going to fill in with the E31, everything except for the bellies. I'm going to leave that for that lightest shade, the E30. So I'll just fill in that little area there on the belly. And then I'm going to switch to some different shades for their muzzles. I'm going to use W00, E70, and E71. I'm going to do like a little light grayish muzzle. And I'm going to color their little stocking feet to match. So I started with the E71 on all of them, blended out with the E70. On their feet, I only used those 2 shades, but on the muzzles, I'm going to add in the W00. Next, I'll switch to some different browns for my tree trunks, and I'm using E53, E55, and E57. And I'm picking and choosing my areas for my shadows on these trees and laying in that E57. I really love the shape of these trees. I thought that they looked really cool and unusual, and even though they're meant for a set that is set in Australia, I think there are lots of different kinds of trees that grow in the rainforest of South America where capybaras are from, so I thought that they would work well for this scene too. So I blended out the E57 with the E55 and then filled in with the E53 for my highlight. For my treetops, I'm going to go with some darker greens using G21, G24, and G28. I'll lay that G28 on the underside of each of those sections of leaves, and then also add a little bit of that anywhere that there's little artist drawn lines to indicate how fluffy and full it is. I'll do the smaller tree exactly the same. I love that we have 2 different sizes. It really helps to build out a scene like this. And then I am going to switch to my midtone, which is going to be the G24, and just again go over the edge of that previous shade and pull upward. Since the light is coming from above, I wanted my shadows to be down below. and the highlight will be at the top of the tree. Because that G28 is such a dark color, I'm coloring in little circular motions again to break up the edge of that line and just pull that color up. And then I will switch to the G21 and fill in the rest of those trees. I'm really excited about this set from Lawnfawn. I think capybaras are such cute little critters. They're just like oversized guinea pigs. I think they're so sweet, and it's so fun to have a new critter to color. So I'm going to color my grasses in the same as I did the trees, except for I'm only going to use those darkest two shades just to separate them out a little bit. So I have some shorter grasses. Those are from the kanga-rrific add-on, and then the taller grasses are from the Swan soirée stamp set. I'm going to introduce one lighter shade. I'm going to add G20 to this mix, and I will use this 4 marker combination for my lily pads, starting with the G28. And I'm going to blend out with the G24. I wanted that contrast of the dark G28, but I also wanted there to be a bit of a yellow green tone in there, like a chartreuse, and so that's why I'm using all 4 shades. That G20 is going to add something that will just help them separate a bit from the trees and look distinct. And then I'm going to use a different green combo for the leaves on my little oranges. Or I think they might be tangerines, I'm not sure exactly, but I'm using YG03 and YG05 for those. For the rest of the fruit, I'm going to use YR02, YR04, and YR07. And I'm putting the darkest shadow where those little dots are drawn. So it was on the left for the single ones, and then on the right for the one that's on the cake. And then I blended out with the YR04 and then the YR02. I also used the YR04 to do the beak of my bird and my little duckling. Next, I'll bring in some yellows. I'm using Y11, Y13, and Y15, and I'm going to color in my bird. I know that it's supposed to be a kookaburra, but I just wanted it to be another tropical bird in this rainforest scene, so I'm going to color it differently. I'm going to do the top glaze on my cake as well. And for all of that, I started with the Y15, blended out with the Y13, and then used the Y11. I also did the stripes on my gecko's back with that Y13. I'll do that bird's tail, wing, and beak in a dark gray combo, and I'm also going to color in the little gecko or salamander, whatever you want him to be, using T3, T5, and T7, starting with the T7, blending out with the T5, and then using that T3 for a nice highlight. Just coloring carefully around his little stripes, making sure to go over his eye with the lightest shade on that little gecko so that you can still see it. I'll stay in that same family for my stones, but I just went a little bit lighter using T1, T3, and T5. And I think that works well for them, but it still kind of shows up as distinct from the critters. And then I'm going to use E40, E41, and E42. I'll color in the bottom part of my cake, starting with that E42, blending out with the E41, and I'll also add some E41 onto my water lilies and my smaller bird, and then I'll fill in with the E40. I'll go back and add some dot detail to my cake with that E42 to give it some texture, some little crumbs. And then I also wanted to darken that up, so I brought in E43. And then all that's left is to give these critters some rosy cheeks using R11, R20 and R22, starting with the R22 and adding a little oval shape to each of their cheeks, even on that little gecko. And then I'll blend around the edges with the R20, just softening that color into the fur. And then I'll add the R11 on just a couple of them when it looks a little bit lighter and needs a little extra blending. For the capybaras and the gecko, I actually did a second layer of the darkest two shades to help it really stand out. And then I added a touch of that R11 into my water lilies, and I'm going to add that to my bird's belly. I'll take a black Sakura jelly roll pen and get that going off to the side and go over any of my critters who have their eyes open to make them nice and bright and shiny. And then I'm going to take a white gel pen and add a little detail to that larger bird's wing. And then I'm going to trim all of these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I'm going to start with a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock, and I'm going to add some clouds to the top of that using the cloudy stencil and some salvaged patina distress oxide ink. I like to start right on my stencil and press firmly as I move upward so that I get a darker outline right around those clouds, and then I kind of lift up on that blending tool as I go up the page so that the blue gets a little bit softer and just a little bit more dreamy. I'm going to place my cloud formations really close together for this one because there's a small area where you're going to be able to see them, and I'm going to do 3 in total. So some of them are going to kind of overlap, but I like that look. I think it makes it look like there's just a lot of clouds in the sky. And then for the lower part of the panel, I'm just going to add a little bit of color. This is going to be covered up, but it's going to be covered with something see-through. So I just wanted to have a little bit of blue in the background just to emphasize the water a little bit. I also wanted to add a little bit of distressing with some splatter detail on the top portion of this panel. So I'm going to take that ink pad and press it onto an acrylic block. I'll add a little spritz of water to that to make it more fluid. Mix that up with a thin paintbrush and tap that off the side, only on the top portion so that we get a little bit of interest in those clouds. And then once I'm happy with how that's looking, I will set this panel aside to dry. Then I've taken another piece of Bristol and trimmed it down with the Riverside backdrop landscape. And I'm going to leave this entire die cut intact for now. I think it makes it easier to do the blending. Then I don't have to worry about any of the delicate edges of the die cut bending as I'm pressing down with my ink blending tool. So I'm starting with some antique linen and just going along the river's edge to create the look of like a sandy bank or like a dirt bank. And then I'm going to bring in a green shade. I'm going to use mowed lawn. And this time I'm going to start at the top of each of those banks and bring that down to meet the antique linen and overlap it just a little bit. I want that to be a little bit darker at the top edge, so I'm pressing down more firmly there. And I will go back and forth a couple times and just add more ink so that I get to the saturation level that I'm looking for. And then I'll carefully use the side of my blending tool to come in from the edges into the lower bank. And again, just add that extra color along the outer edge. Then I'll go back to my antique linen and just blend over the edge of that again to get these to meld a little bit better and just become a little bit more seamless. And then once I am happy with that, I can pop out the extra pieces because I'm only going to be using the frame and those riverbanks. Then I'm going to take a piece of pastel pearlescent vellum. This is the blue shade. And I am going to glue that to the back of my Riverside backdrop landscape. So I'm just taking the glue tube and adding a little bit of liquid glue up the sides and across the bottom. And then I will line that up on my work surface, make sure it's on there nice and straight, and press that down into place. Then I'm going to take these little wave die cuts from the Riverside backdrop landscape, and I'm going to tape those into place. And I'm going to do one of each size, and then I'll do multiple of the smaller one just to really fill in the scene. So I'm just deciding where they are going to go and holding those in place with a little bit of post-it tape. And then once I have them all die cut, we have these nice little waves that add some texture, but also add a place where I can slip something inside later on. I'm going to stamp my sentiment on my background next, and I'm doing that in VersaFine Onyx Black ink and stamping "Have a very Cappy Birthday" in that top right corner. And then I'll pop that out so I can add my card base, and I'm using Lawnfawn Mermaid cardstock and stamping in Peacock ink. And I'm going to do another one of the capybaras, the other cake, and then one of the tiny sentiments that says "Cap Cap Hooray," which I think is super cute. To assemble this scene, I have added some very thin strips of foam tape. I just cut those down with my Cutter Bee Teflon coated scissors and added those all along the edges and behind that riverbank so that it would be very well supported, but there's none behind the vellum because that would show. And then I am going to line that up with the background piece and press that down into place. Then I can bring in my images, and I'm going to start with the adult capybara, and I'm going to add some liquid glue to the top half and then slip him into that largest die cut wave so that you can see his little legs and it looks like he's swimming, which I think is so cute. And then I'll add a little duckling over toward the right hand side. I want to have some of these oranges or tangerines bobbing in the water, so I'll add some of those to the little waves. I also have a couple of these taller grasses that I wanted to tuck into the water's edge down at the bottom of the frame. So I have one on the left and one on the right, and then I'll add the third one in just a little bit. Then I pulled out the water lilies and the lily pads so that I can set the scene around my capybara and his little duckling friend and just fill in the river portion of my landscape. I'm going to tuck another lily pad back behind the little duckling and add another water lily on top of that. I thought it would be cute to have one of these fruits sitting on top of the capybara's head as if he's dove under the water and kind of popped up with it. So I went ahead and added that. And then I wanted another one down toward the left corner for balance with the bright orange little pops. So I actually replaced the water lily, and then I'm going to move that a little bit more toward the inside. I've got one more water lily that I'm going to add up behind the capybara, and I also have one more of those tall grasses that I'm going to tuck into the little wave notch that is just behind that. And I did have to kind of pick up the card base to tuck that in. If you just bend it a little bit forward, it makes it easier for those waves to pop open. For the trees, I've added some foam tape to the top half where they will overlap into the sky, and then just using the liquid glue on the trunks. So I'm going to add the larger one over toward the left, and I'll have the smaller one on the right. Again, just creating a bit of balance with the two trees on either side. I really like cards to have balance if you can't tell. So then I'm going to take this large stone and add that right to the top of the hill in the center. And on top of that, I'm going to place the cake. And I've added a bit of foam tape behind that, as that is going to go up into the sky area. I'll take one of the baby capybaras and add it right next to the riverbank, waiting for Dad to come in, and right below that tree. And then the other capybara is going to go up next to the birthday cake, so I just put some foam tape behind his head. I'm going to add this yellow and black bird into the larger tree. So I just added a tiny piece of foam tape into the area between the green parts of the tree, and then that is going to support him nicely since the rest of him will overlap the tree. And then the little gecko is going to go over on the right hand side, but first I wanted to add one of the smaller grasses. So I put the larger grasses into the river and then the smaller grasses onto the land just to make them look a little bit different. And then I'm going to add the other small patch of grass over on the riverbank edge, and I added a small stone, and I'll place the other little bird on the other side of the birthday cake. I took the largest of the stitch rectangle frames and die cut that out of some fake tan cardstock so that we could reinforce those little pops of orange, which I think make the card look so festive and perfect for a birthday. And I'm going to glue that right over top of the card base, making sure to line that up nicely. And then I will glue this whole card base to the front of the card. Again, just making sure to line up those corners so that it's on there nice and straight. And then all that's left is to add a bit of glitter. So I'm going to take my Stardust stickles and add it to the fruits. I'm not going to go crazy with it because I think this card is perfectly gender neutral. And so I wanted to kind of keep it that way. But I added it to the fruits and the water lilies and a touch of it to the cake. And that is going to complete this card, so I will pick it up so you can see it in a bit more detail and hopefully catch a little bit of that sparkle and shine, the fun glimmer of that pearlescent vellum, and there is another peek at the inside. I had so much fun creating this card for you today, so I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to leave me a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you all have an amazing day. Bye-bye.